Chapter 5. The Snargets. "Why don't you go out and get some fresh air, Barney dear?" asked Grandmother. Barney stood and looked out of the window. "Doesn't look very fresh to me," he grunted. A yellow fog hung over the trees outside. The smoke from the back kitchen chimney stirred itself into it, and there seemed to be a smell of distant cement works. "Never mind, dear. It's better than stuffing indoors all day." "All right, Granny. I'll go out." After about 20 minutes, he had found his jersey mixed up with his bedclothes, one outdoor shoe under the bed and the other one under the chest in the hall. He wandered out into the garden. It was neither warm nor cold, and there was no wind at all. He made for the chalk pit, whistling and with his hands in his pockets. As he came near the edge of the pit, he stopped whistling and stood still. There were voices coming from the bottom of the pit. His pit. Well, perhaps it wasn't his pit. It didn't even belong to Grandfather. Or did it? Perhaps holes in the ground didn't belong to anybody. All the same, he was quite annoyed that other people should be poking around down the pit. He went cautiously to the edge and peeped over. Down there, among the tin cans and other rubbish, were 3 boys of about his own age or older, dressed in jerseys and trousers that were grubbier and more tattered than his own, and grey tennis shoes with holes in the toes. They all had long, rather greasy hair. Barney recognised them. They were the Snarget boys, part of a large family who lived in an old house with tarred weatherboards and were always getting into trouble. At least, that was what the grown-ups said. But then who didn't get into trouble? The Snargets seemed to be building some sort of shack for themselves out of dead branches and old sheets of corrugated iron, with a lot of horseplay and cries of, "No, not that way, Clever. Like this, see?" Barney crawled into a place where a twisted tree trunk grew from the very edge of the cliff, hid himself behind it, broke off a handy-sized clod of clay and roots from the cliff edge, and hurled it at the roof of the shack. It curved through the air towards the target, but missed and landed almost noiselessly on a mossy log. Barney chose himself another clod and threw it. This time it struck the bottom of an upturned pail and exploded like a little bomb, scattering bits of clay over one of the Snargets. "Here, who's chucking dirt?" cried the first Snarget suspiciously. "I never," said another Snarget. "Must have been him," he added, pointing to the third and youngest. "Leave off, will you?" said the first Snarget, "or I'll do you, see?" "I never done nothing," protested the youngest Snarget. "Oh, you didn't, did you?" said the first. "No, I never." "Well, don't you do it again, that's all." At the top of the cliff, Barney, the cause of the trouble, chuckled to himself and broke off another clod. This time his aim was true, and the clod landed fair and square on the sheet of iron with a most satisfying clang. 3 Snarget heads popped out at once like ferrets out of rabbit holes. "I told you someone's chucking dirt," said the first Snarget. "And I told you it wasn't me," said the youngest. They looked round, scowling at the floor of the pit. "All right, it's no use hiding. We can see you," called the oldest Snarget. Barney hugged himself in silence behind his tree trunk. He knew this was just bluff. They hadn't even looked in his direction. "It's old Albert, I bet," said the middle-sized Snarget. "He's been and followed us." "We can see you, Albert," called the first Snarget. "Come out to that bush or we'll come and do you." They were standing looking at the far end of the pit with their backs to Barney. With great care, Barney broke off as big a clod as he could find and aimed it at the roof of the shack. It hit and exploded with another loud clang, scattering pieces all over all 3 Snargets, who ducked wildly and clutched at each other and then looked foolishly at being taken by surprise. They whispered fiercely amongst themselves, pointing at places on the cliff edge. "Come from behind us, did it?" "No, there, up there. He is. Don't be daft. He's up in them bushes. I tell you, I saw him." They all pointed in different directions at the edge of the cliff. "It's all right, Albert," called the eldest Snarget again. "It's no use you hiding yourself up there. We're coming up to get you." But this didn't worry Barney either. By the time they got to the top, he could be well away. The Snargets must have thought this too, because they didn't make a move. They retired inside their rickety shack instead. Barney scored another direct hit on it and a near miss. Heads popped out each time and looked round fiercely, but he was too well hidden and they failed to spot him. But there seemed to be a lot of whispering going on in the shack, and then all three Snargets came out and started walking towards the way out. The eldest called over his shoulder in a casual voice, "Goodbye, Albert," and the other two repeated it. "We're going. Home now, Albert," called the eldest. "It's our dinner time. But listen here, Albert, we know you're up there. Just keep your hands off our shack, see? We got something in there that's valuable. We just dare you to meddle with it, that's all." The Snargets walked off towards the way out of the pit, whistling loudly and banging tins with sticks. Barney waited until he could hear their feet on the lane dying away. Funny, he thought, they've gone. Still, perhaps it is their dinner time. He came out from behind the tree and went round to the edge of the pit to the low side and walked along the bottom to the shack the Snargets had built. He wondered what the valuable thing was that they'd left in. There didn't seem to be anything except a paper bag full of chestnut conkers. "Oh, pooh, silly old conkers," said Barney aloud. "They're not valuable. Perhaps they'd buried something." He dug around in the mossy floor and unearthed a very rusty tin box. It had writing on the outside. He could just about make out the letters. "Gold block," it said. It felt very heavy. Ought he to open it or not? He decided he would. There was no harm in just looking. The hinge lid was rusted to the bottom and wouldn't move. He banged at it with a stone. Out fell a rusty mass of screws, nuts, bolts and curtain rings. Inside the lid of the box was more writing which said that gold block was the finest pipe tobacco made from choice Virginia leaf. Barney threw the tin away in disgust, and a voice said, "All right, mister, come out, we got you covered."